6-1, 9-2 SEC West champion LSU football Tigers went on to take on a 4-7, 1-6 Texas A&M Aggie football team that was at its lowest point it has been over the past decade. And as we said last week, this was the final game in which if you lost, people would be upset. Right? It was the final kind of risk. If you won this and won 10 regular season games and everything else would be Lanyap, Georgia, bowl game, whatever. You could also completely break the spirit of Texas A&M. Given the low point they were currently at, given the transfer portal about to open up on the other side of the weekend, and yet, or I guess one more week till that portal window opens up. But in the end, you don't just lose, but maybe in the most shocking way possible, you just get your butt kicked by a bunch of 18-year-olds. Like, you got beat up. You got beat up on the line of scrimmage. A-Chain beat you up. Defensively, they didn't miss any tackles. Hit you hard. You never threatened them deep or over the top. Just a disappointment really from beginning to end. And it's not wholly outside of some of the performance that we've seen out of this LSU team sometimes this year. But in every other game, they found a way to make the plays that they needed to in order to win. And I'm not counting like Tennessee or Florida State in this. I'm talking about like the Arkansas, Auburn, once they started to roll a little bit where they didn't have it, but they still found a way to win. But they just played with fire too many times. And this time they played with fire with some really good freshmen. And, it was just an incredible wet fart of a night followed up with an even more disgusting bout of moist flatulation on Sunday in that Saints game. Just an awful, terrible holiday weekend of football to start this final push. But I am very excited to have you back, Jake. What's going on, man?
Thanks for the setup. But everything you said is actually factual. You talk about playing with fire for LSU. When you look at just conference play, so just SEC games, points for, 223. Points against, 207.
Yeah.
So that kind of tells you with the 6-2 record, I mean, you're that close, and it lets you know. And I know the Tennessee game, obviously that score kind of puts this a little bit on the scale of points against, but still, like when you look at that, you played a lot of close games. You were able to make those plays. You look at Florida, you look at Auburn, you look at Arkansas. You're able to make the plays to win the football game. And then this one, A&M did not allow you to because you said it. They were the more physical football team on both lines of scrimmage. And that was maybe the most surprising thing. Like LSU not taking shots over the top. Okay, we've seen that before. We've seen LSU be able to overcome that. But you got beat up on the line of scrimmage really, I'd say for the first time maybe since the opener.
Yeah.
Because the Tennessee game, like you just got beat by a team that at that point was much better than you, obviously, and their offense, and they're pushing the ball down the field. But this is the first time since Florida State that you kind of got beat up. And then defensively, like you were so good as far as lane integrity on, Ole Miss game, Alabama game against the rush. And then this game, you over-pursued almost every run.
Yeah.
Right? And so that was something, even if you did get pushed on the defensive line in the front seven, you were overrunning everything. And a good running back, and they've got a great one in A-Chain, is going to find those holes. So we can break down the game, but it was surprising the way LSU lost, right? Yeah. They lost to a bad football team, and they got beat up front, which they hadn't in a very long time.
Yeah, and I think you're hitting on, to me, what I can't really explain, and maybe dive into the film later today. We'll tell the full story, Jake, but really they attacked LSU in the way that if you looked on paper, it's how LSU should be vulnerable. They rotate three guys on the interior, right? Like, in theory, throughout this entire year, you should have, if your O-line was good enough, and LSU played some very good rushing teams, you should have been able to run, and eventually wear that group down and then start to dominate by the end. I think what's been surprising all year is that somehow that never happened. Not against an Arkansas team that averages 1 million rush yards per game. Not against an Ole Miss team that averages 1 million rush yards per game. Like, Mekhi Wingo and company found a way every single week to fight and find a way to not have that become a problem. And it's like, you thought, I was like, man, okay, if they pass those tests, then surely it's not going to be this awful Texas A&M offensive line that we have clowned all year long that is finally going to be the one that gets it done. And then it was even like, you got to credit this A&M line because, like, the play that really stands out in my head, and by the way, nobody's feeling 100% in the studio today. We are pushing through this. I'm dripping sweat. But like the 3rd and 7, when I think they were near the red zone, and they run that twist with Perkins coming off of the edge and bending around to the inside. And they've used it a million times this year to catch a quarterback that tries to escape the pocket late. Only this time, the A&M guard perfectly picked up Harold Perkins, and Wigman ends up getting the first down. They end up scoring a touchdown. So this A&M O-line that has been bad was anything but Saturday, as they just kicked LSU's ass up front.
Well, I mean, when you look at what LSU did against Ole Miss, what they did against Arkansas, what they've done against the teams that have run the ball effectively, those are teams that, even though they can be physical, they still run a bulk of their runs out of gun. They run counter out of gun, they run power, they run zone, they run all of – this might actually be the first time that A&M's outdated offense played to their benefit.
Yeah.
They played with tight ends. They played with that fullback played more than any fullbacks played in the last 5 years maybe in the SEC. I mean, 24 was out there as much as anybody. And that was different. That was a different way to run the football. So you might – you go against an Ole Miss and Arkansas and Alabama, teams that run the football better. But they lined up and said, you know what we're doing, and you can't stop it. Like, that's the most deflating thing. Yeah. They went old school, something we've clowned them about all season long. Everybody's clowned them. And it's not a recipe for success. It's not going to work in many games, as you see with them having one of the worst records
the only
in the
other
Power
game they
5.
Scored 30 was Sam Houston.
Exactly.
And they even and that's take out the defensive
touchdown.
touchdown.
UMass held them to 20 last week.
Yeah, and take out the defensive touchdown, they still put up 30 offensively by the time it was all said and done.
So they lined up, it went old school, and they pushed you all over the place. And again, so the things that we've talked about all season long that you've been able to get away with 3 rotating defensive linemen, being really good in the front 7, well, they kind of challenged you and said, this is what we're going to do. And Wegman made the plays that he had to make when he had to make them, and so it gave you enough of a threat in the passing game. But they lined up with a fullback and a tight end and ran old-school Jimbo Fisher offense.
Yeah, it made it incredibly easy on Wigman. When you can run the ball like he did. He wasn't asked to do a lot, but he did enough in that first half. And the problem is, again, I do believe this was a brittle culture that they have at A&M right now. And if you had managed to apply enough pressure, I think you could have broken them. And it looked like maybe to start that second half when you have the 3-and-out touchdown, 3-and-out, you're like, okay, here it comes. Here comes the killing blow. And then on 3rd and 1, Jaden pulls instead of handing it, which would have been an easy first down. And, these are the things that just happen.
Easy first, who knows where it ends up. I mean,
it was wide. It was you could drive a bus through that hole. Mack truck, as they used to say. And instead it turns into a scoop and score, and that panic that was starting to spread around the A&M sideline completely subsided, and the crowd came back alive, and after that, that was a wrap. Brian Kelly even said in the postgame they never recovered from that. Dr. Noss in the chat. Who the hell is Dr. Noss? With his check mark in this name. I've never seen that. Anyway. Bye for you, Chad said, if anyone would have said in August, quote, LSU will win the SEC West and go 9-3, then everyone would have laughed. Today, everyone is upset over a bad loss. It happens, it sucks, but 9-3 and SEC West champs. Yeah, that is fair and true, but it sucks that you are now in the same boat that Tennessee is, of having to do those sorts of mental gymnastics and contextual explaining away, right? Like, in the same way, yeah, if you would have told Tennessee they were going to go 6-2 in the SEC and 10-2 in the regular season, they would have been ecstatic. They have never sniffed success like that over the past decade and a half. But, as we always say on the show, what actually decides the happiness level of fans is not the results themselves, it's where they land in relation to the expectation. So when Tennessee has minus 500 odds to make the playoffs, And all they have to do is beat South Carolina and Vandy. Yeah, those Volunteer fans are counting on a playoff appearance. And then Spencer Rattler, shout out Spencer Rattler and USC, Shane Beamer, big time weekend winners. We can get to them a bit later. But, so like Tennessee's still happy, and I'm sure the Vandy win made them feel better. But in the end, they aren't as happy as they could be because it looked as if they were going to the playoff for the first time in school history, and they completely blew it. So in the same way, when LSU is sitting there with a chance to get a 10-win regular season, what was it, guys, for the 9th or 10th time? Maybe 10th or 11th time in school history? I can't remember. We added it up the other day. When that's the expectation, and you're going against a team that you already hate and you don't want to have any bragging rights over you, and they're awful, and you have a chance to break them, and you let that all slip away. Like, I do think with distance, you will see the value of this year, and it is a year that should be celebrated overall. But I also think it is completely fair to be upset about a bad loss against a bad team that you were objectively better than. And now when you look, you got to play Georgia, likely drops you to 9-4. And then you're running the risk of 9-5 with a bowl game unless you can pull off the win. And you maybe, we'll see how it all shakes out, you could have potentially cost yourself a chance at a big bowl like a New Year's Six.
Yeah, I mean, you could have beaten A&M, gone into this Georgia game, gotten beat by whatever the score would have been, and still had a really solid opportunity to make a New Year's Six bowl game.
Yeah.
And now it feels like you've got to win this game to get into the Sugar Bowl, because if you win, Georgia's still going to the playoff. And so the next SEC team, as the SEC champ, obviously you're going to the Sugar Bowl. But now, like, you lose this game, you're not. Like Alabama, shocker, is going to take that spot in the Sugar Bowl if they don't find their weasel way, weasel it in there to the playoff.
More salt in the wound there. You opened up the door for the team that you beat to go to a better bowl game than you because you couldn't handle your business against A&M. And even Alabama barely handled their business against A&M, but they did indeed handle it.
Yeah, I mean, A&M threw a pass. Well, Jimbo didn't call a play into the end zone, but a play to the 1 yard line for that game, last play of the game. But so now you're probably looking at some type of a Orlando Bowl situation, Citrus Bowl situation, which still, again, like coming into it, you're like, let's get to a bowl game. And that, that's the expectation is to win 7. And still, like, we'll talk about, how the season played out compared to what we thought it would be coming into the season. I mean, the field still that I usually have out here every day picked them to finish 7th in the West. So I understand all of that, but Sugar Bowls and New Year's Six bowl games are stepping stones to what can be special. I talk about my experience when I was playing all the time. In 2006, like, we felt like we were a really good team. If there was a playoff, we might have won the whole thing, but we got to a Sugar Bowl against Notre Dame. It was a stepping stone for a 2007 national championship. 2018, you go to the Fiesta Bowl against UCF. You win that. 2019, you win the national championship. They can be something that really sets you up for success. And I thought if this team could get to a Sugar Bowl, they still can. They can go out there, they can win and do that whole deal. I'm not saying it's dead, but even with a loss, if you beat A&M, I think you get into that Sugar Bowl. You get into a New Year's Six bowl game, in my opinion, and then that sets up next year to be a really successful year.
Well, and I mean, I went through the same thing in the 10 to 11 season where now New Year's Six didn't exist at the time yet, but beating A&M in the Cotton Bowl to finish 11-2. And finish in the top 5, like you said, became that stepping stone to making a natty the next year. This kind of interesting, Jake. First loss for Brian Kelly in November since when? Like 2017, I believe.
Yeah, 2017.
November is for contenders. That has been the message, and LSU has abided by that, as all Brian Kelly teams have over the past few years. But in the end, here on this day in A&M, and you could hear it after the game, he was sorely disappointed and couldn't really fully explain it beyond saying they just didn't prepare them well enough. And I guess maybe the team was guilty of falling into the all-too-human trap of thinking that you were just going to roll the ball out there and win because they were 1-6 in the SEC. But that's kind of, and it's so funny, Jake, because the entire year I've been worried about A&M doing this, right? Because they have talent. What happens if they put it together for a game? The entire year we've been talking about that, and finally I had given myself over to the idea that it just wasn't going to happen. The UMass game was a straw that broke the camel's back, and this was, no, you know what? It's just not going to happen. It's just a bad team. But it actually is almost a commentary on the bad job that Jimbo and company has done, because you see what this team could be capable of when it locks in and it's actually motivated and executing well. But it finally happened. Like the thing that I feared all year that then I finally relented against, of course, it comes to pass as soon as you accept that it isn't going to. There is a wonderful touch of irony in there. That's why college football is so much fun, man. You can't, you just, there's so many variables at play. You just never quite know what is going to happen.
Yeah, and it's wild to think, but like that's A&M's last game. Like that's how bad they were. Like that is their last game. They will not be going to a bowl game. They fall short of a bowl game. And that team is having their exit meetings today. And you're still getting ready for – you're going to be playing for another month.
Which probably helps them too, because there's always a little juice in the air when you know it's time to go home, right? I mean, like when you know you got a little break coming up, there's always a little, all right, let's lay it all on the field.
Yeah,
And then we're chilling.
There was a year that the NFL, I think we were 8-7, but we had already been eliminated, and we're playing in Denver, and it was as free as I've ever seen a football team play. And we went out there, and I think Denver went to the playoffs that year. I'm not sure. I have to double check that. But we just beat the hell out of them, and we had like a bunch of backups. Like we had a bunch of guys sitting out the game, but like Phillip was kind of calling like his own game a little bit. Like North's like, hey, what do you like here? He's just like, oh shoot, I don't know, coach. And then he goes out there and he calls it, and we played free, and there's something to what you're talking about, but still, unfortunately, you let that beat you.